Good afternoon. My name is Troy Schneider. I'm the executive editor of FCW, and I'm very happy to have been able to moderate today's panel on the policy outlook for federal IT. We want to get into the conversation as quickly as possible, so let me just briefly introduce our panelists, and we will just take it from there. Immediately to my right is Laurent Crenshaw, who's the legislative director for House Oversight and Government Reform Chairman Darrell Issa. His portfolio focuses on intellectual property, telecommunications, information systems, and internet policy. He's been on the Hill for about a decade and has also worked for the Office of the Majority Whip and the House Republican Conference. Next to him, we go to the other side of Congress, and Jonathan Kraden, who's Counsel and Senior Policy Advisor to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He focuses on the federal government's management information technology and including the IT reform efforts, cloud computing, data center consolidation, and most of the other topics we'll be talking about here today. John has worked at the Federal Trade Commission and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I should also note that he is an FCW Fed 100 award winner this year. Laurent, I'm sure your time is coming.
Congratulations.
And then finally, as Mike mentioned, Dan Chenok's unable to be here today, but David Leduc from SIIA has very graciously stepped in, and he covers cybersecurity, open standards, cloud, and broader government IT issues as the Senior Director for Public Policy for SIIA. And with that, Laurent, I will sit down in a minute. I just wanted to be able to put my notes at the podium. Your boss was talking about his views for IT acquisition reform, which is one of several topics that fall under today's umbrella. But if you could talk about what you see moving on the House side and what the priorities, certainly from your boss's perspective, look like for this Congress.
Absolutely. And thanks, Troy. So I do have the rather unenviable position of following up on my boss's keynote from earlier today. So I'll try to echo in some ways and expound upon some of the items that he didn't necessarily get around to. So as Troy mentioned before, and Chairman Issa did at the lunch, one of the main items that we're going to be working on this Congress is on his Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act. We released the draft version of it towards the end of last Congress in order to solicit comments from the broader community in general, and really just to ensure that what we do introduce and move forward on is something that has buy-in from everybody that's involved, because we really do feel like that's the most important thing here in order to actually get a product that can create the greater efficiencies within the acquisition process so that the federal government can end up saving the money that's important at this point for us to do, or to get a greater return on. We had a hearing last month. It was our first hearing, actually, that the Oversight Committee had, and one of the key items that came out of it is the fact that there's about $20 billion of waste on a yearly basis in the IT acquisitions process, whether it's through obsolete systems or whether it's just through not getting the necessary performance that we should out of the items that we purchase. So that's one thing. Another area that we're likely going to push, again, this Congress is on sort of the evolved form of the Data Act. Now, for those of you who hopefully followed it last Congress, one of the key items within the Data Act was basically creating a standardized way in which information is shared amongst the government, XBRL in most instances, but basically allowing these data sets to be, that the government puts out there, either to be more efficiently used and shared within our own agencies or by companies such as many that you all interact with or are a part of on the outside. So Chairman Issa is very interested in moving forward on that, again, this Congress, hopefully getting it across the finish line. And another item that was mentioned that you all may be interested in was his draft suspension and debarment bill, or the Suspend Act, that we just started floating around last week. And that's really involves trying to remove many of the bad actors on the contracting side. While it's a relatively small percentage, we like to believe overall, it's still the the reality that within most of the agencies, the suspension and debarment sectors don't have enough manpower or resources to really deal with looking into and investigating the claims of fraud or abuse there. And then quickly, just sort of to round it out, I'll also mention that sort of in the broader scheme of things, it's likely that the House is going to look at doing ECPA reform this Congress as well. And I know that that sort of doesn't necessarily affect the federal side so much, but it affects the broader cloud sector in general, and that's something that I think we're really going to try to give a greater degree of clarity to. So I'll stop right there.
That's right. And one question for those who are not fully acronym savvy, ECPA reform?
ECPA is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act.
Right. Right. And I'll, over on the other side of the hill, John, what is your boss in the Homeland Security and Government Reform Committee looking to do?
Well, thank you. I'm sure many people are aware. First of all, thank you to all the hardy souls that are still here at 3 o'clock. I know it's been a long day. There's a new chairman on the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee, Chairman Carper, who in years past has chaired the FFM, Federal Financial Management and IT subcommittee, and he has always been interested in and had a priority for IT management and IT management reform, having had his own legislation over the last couple Congresses, the IT Investment Management Act. We also have a new ranking member in Senator Coburn, who has also been made a career and a name for himself in combating waste and fraud and abuse in the federal government. And so there is, in many ways, there seems to be this coming together in this perfect storm of an opportunity there. But before I talk about the legislative outlook, the legislative policy outlook, I do want to focus on the other levers that are also available to Congress. And the Office of the eGov Administrator has been very busy over the last couple of years between the 25-point IT reform plan, between the digital government strategy, and just going through, before I came here today, I was going back through the 25-point plan and the digital strategy and looking at, as well as the CIO responsibilities memo that they've had out, and there's a lot of policies, initiatives that are taking place, and I think one of the things that it's incumbent upon Congress to do is to follow up and make sure that we're holding agencies' feet to the fire on a lot of the things that they've been tasked with doing, because there really are some great initiatives that have been put forth and that are underway, and I'm sure everyone in this room recognizes that without that oversight on behalf of Congress and from agency leadership, some of these initiatives have the propensity to kind of fall away if people aren't paying attention, because there is, in many instances, a resistance to change. And so I think that as far as, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about the legislative policy outlook, I do think that there is something to be said about making sure that we're working those levers to make sure that all the other initiatives that are already in the pipeline are getting done and being done effectively and efficiently. And with that, I will turn it over.
Yeah, David, be interested as an outside observer what you see as likely on the Hill, or maybe what industry would like to see at the top of the priority list.
Well, I guess I'll kind of take a step back and kind of cast a broader view. And again, we apologize that Dan Chenok couldn't be here. I've worked with him for a long time. You know, we worked together back during the, I think Laurent mentioned the eGov Act, going back 2001. A bunch of us that worked on that long time ago. So I'll try to channel Dan and bring in a lot of his tremendous insights. And I guess the other perspective that I'd like to inject, and someone else I'd like to cite, I always like to cite Dr. Pat Gallagher, the head of NIST. As he said at one of the cloud workshops several years ago, he made this analogy that I thought was just so insightful about with cloud policy in the federal government, we're really building the plane while we're flying it. and that really resonated because it's true, right? I mean, we've all wanted to rush forward with the cloud, even while we're sorting through issues such as standards and reference architecture and, security and privacy. We've made tons of progress, provided a lot of answers, but the government has plowed forward, essentially building the plane while we're flying it, and I think done a very effective job, and we're delighted that the federal government, this administration, has been so aggressive in its shift to cloud and innovative technologies, and I'm certainly very thankful for Laurent and Jonathan and their bosses for being interested and taking a close look at this, because it is a very important issue. And I guess the other element that I would inject that I think is very useful, and I think this reflects some of Laurent's comments as well, and Jonathan's, one of the previous panelists, I thought cast this very appropriately by bringing in the reference to CMSA. It's not just cloud. I mean, this conference is CloudGov. It used to be SaaSGov. We call it's CloudGov today, but the reference to cloud, mobile, social, and analytical. So not only is it such a challenging time, and we're essentially building the plane as we're flying it with respect to cloud computing and implementing that, but we're also dealing with the recent introduction of innovation in mobile computing, and business analytics is a tremendous opportunity, and obviously social. So these four technologies, interrelated technologies, are converging, have been converging for some time. And really making for a challenging environment, but I think certainly a very exciting environment, one with a lot of opportunity for new innovation, for efficiencies, for better ability of agencies to implement their missions, to hopefully save money, cost savings. So it's a challenging policy time. The administration has a number of policies out there that are very important in helping us to move in the right direction. And these gentlemen and their bosses and a lot of folks on the Hill are very focused on reforming the policies as necessary to help the government continue to move forward and be innovative. So we appreciate that, and I think that's kind of the general introduction, as a way to cast it.
Thank you, all three of you. And to move policy forward, you need to build the consensus not only across parties but across chambers. And what's certainly happened with a lot of major initiatives last Congress is that the House would move and the Senate wouldn't, or vice versa. I mean, it's sort of, legislative politics 101. But I'm curious, Chairman Issa has been doing a lot to gather comment on his IT procurement reform bill. I wonder if either of you can speak to the degree there started to be conversations between the House and Senate about whether that measure or some of the others that you mentioned. Where if there's going to be something that's first out of the gate, where are we likely to see movement?
I guess I'll be the first one to tackle that question, and I want to start off with a compliment to Chairman Issa, but also to Rich Butel and Eric Eric, who happens to be here, because they have been, from the moment that this first dropped in the last Congress as a draft bill, it's been a very open process, and Rich has, I wouldn't say he has my number on speed dial yet. I've held off on giving him my cell phone number for that reason, but now he has reached out, and he has, they really are trying to kind of hear a lot of industry comments and just be open and transparent in the process. That's not to say that we're always going to agree. But that's fine as long as we're keeping those lines of communication open. And I think they have been very transparent and very outgoing, and it's a testament to Chairman Issa and his staff.
And echoing off of Jonathan's comments, we're moving through on the process with FITARA right now in regards to, you're likely going to see in the near future a revised version of it that we're going to put out that is going to have taken in a lot of the comments that we've gotten from outside industry, and then we're going to once again make that available to the general public so that we can get more input on it as we begin to move through the actual legislative process. Because our main goal here is to actually have a product that, as it moves through in coordination with Jonathan's committee as well, is one that actually doesn't deal with as many of the same challenges that generally come up along the way as you're trying to move something through. So hopefully that will be the case. Now, you never know exactly if there are concerns that do pop up down the line, but going through it in this manner, it's our hope to have taken care of 90% of the worries that individual entities may have before we get at least out of the House.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are there other measures or issue areas that we're starting to see that traction as well? Whether it's, in defining this broadly, I would include cyber as another possible topic there.
I mean, I can tell you that cyber is a priority of Chairman Carper's. I know he was part of the Lieberman, Collins, Carper, Feinstein, Rockefeller. I don't want to forget anybody, mm-hmm. but he was part of that effort last year. And we've got a team that's working on that's kind of hoping to get it started again. And it is, I mean, the cyber issue is not, it underpins everything that we're doing. So it is a priority of the committee.
Mm-hmm. Cyber is interesting on our end. I mean, from a legislative standpoint, the Oversight Committee's role on cybersecurity was relatively narrow last Congress. It was mostly with the FISMA 2.0 mm-hmm. that we put out there just to create a better degree of information sharing within the agencies themselves and modernization there. But there was a lot of activity that Chairman Issa was sort of a part of or monitored. The big controversy in the House side was with CISPA last Congress, and word has it that it's going to be introduced again soon. We've been hearing that tomorrow that the administration may release its cybersecurity executive order, which I've been hearing is only going to deal with critical infrastructure in these cases. So I think that we're going to continue to have a high degree of interest in this regard. Now the question is, the challenges are most other congressional committees or offices going to sort of take the time to go through the open process before actually moving it through the legislative process? That's hard to say. It's going to be up to our bosses and to others that are out there. The administration, I know, reached out to a lot of different entities as it was going through the process of drafting its executive order. Now, we're sort of dealing in this reality, though, especially with cyber, where there are so many different groups that are involved and have concerns, that even by talking to industry leaders, you're not necessarily going to deal with the sort of potential landmines that are going to come from whether it's civil liberties groups or others that also have tremendous concerns, at least on cyber.
And I jump in from an industry perspective. Obviously, cybersecurity is critically important, and it's been a policy priority for us for many years. And obviously, there have been challenges just finding the sweet spot, I guess, that could make it through the Congress. And as was mentioned, we're all expecting an executive order on cyber tomorrow that will, I think, be cast as kind of a down payment, a first step. But I don't think there's any question that there's still going to be a lot of work to be done. That the Congress will need to continue working in this area, and they will work in this area, I'm sure. And as we've always said, information sharing, first and foremost, is a critical priority. New policies that can help the public and private sectors share cyber threat information more effectively and without risk is absolutely critical. And again, so we do expect legislation to be introduced on that very soon, and that'll be a critical component of this. I mean, it's a little, most of that is kind of sits outside the basket, the technical basket of federal IT policy. But you're right, it's very germane, because the government, the public sector, and the private sector, we're in this together. We're in cyber protection together, and we need to address it together, and policies need to reflect that.
Do you think? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no.
Do you think that the executive order will be a catalyst for Congress to move, or is it going to be, sort of redraw the lines more firmly, where it's hard for people to find ways to move forward?
I don't know. I'm not touching that one. Congress. This has been a high priority, bipartisan priority for years, and I think it will remain so. So whether or not the executive order adds additional incentive, I'm not sure. I don't think it takes any away. It may actually address some of the. It may take some of the pressure off the critical infrastructure focus that we've seen in the Congress for several years. I mean, it may or may not. I think perhaps that's part of the goal, to kind of start moving down that road. And that was one of the hardest elements of the legislation. So maybe it'll accomplish that.
I'm going to kind of punt like David and just kind of tell you a short story about an article I read before I came here. It was in the Hill or Roll Call about a recent Washington Post ABC survey that was done, and it was about immigration reform. And it found that when asked a question about a path to citizenship or whatever it might have been, you found overwhelming support for this particular policy. Once you tied President Obama's name to it, the support among Republicans dropped precipitously. I'm not blaming Republicans. It was funny because on the Democratic side, whatever policy Obama was supporting, you saw the interest in it rise. So I just kind of throw that out there as highlighting some of the challenges that this executive order might introduce. I'm nothing about the policy, anything like that. It was, I thought, just an interesting story about Washington and today's climate.
And you know, this executive order has been sort of floating around since at least November, you know, where there's been talk, there were supposedly drafts leaked, and it's sort of, the conversation around it has definitely evolved since then. I think with it, if it does happen tomorrow, then I think that it will serve at least a positive purpose of driving I think it will drive the conversation forward, and I think it will force Congress to re-engage. And I think that that's a very key issue here, because there was a desire to re-engage last Congress. You know, on the House side, there was the Cybersecurity Commission that Mac Thornberry headed up, and it came out with these results that ended up being incorporated as either CISPA or FISMA, and there was also a bill that started making its way through the Homeland Security Committee that didn't end up coming to the floor. But that conversation sort of hit a wall when there was the public reaction, I think, at least to CISPA, once it did pass out of the House and was over in the over in the Senate. So I think re-engaging there is important, because having the standards in place on cyber, and especially as we're here talking about the cloud in particular, if we're going to continue to have an effective transition to the cloud, I think, from the government side, then there needs to be a greater degree of confidence in the security of the information that's out there. Especially when, as Chairman Issa alluded to earlier, rather than having purely agency-based clouds, or even one that's sort of internal to the federal government, if you're still going to get a higher degree of results from using the commercial scale and the commercial adaptability, then you absolutely need to make sure that the security standards there and the information sharing is there, so that you can be more able to deal with any threats that may arise.
I want to talk tactics for a minute, rather than the specific pieces of legislation. Given where we are with the budget and sequestration and the next round of appropriations and any other number of variations on the fiscal theme, where there's not the bipartisanship and the nonpartisanship that we can see in the IT side, how does that affect the ability to move any of this forward? First of all, does it leave room to move it forward? And second of all, how do you try and take something like FITARA and actually get progress? Is it about standing it up and moving it as a standalone bill, or is it looking for a vehicle to attach it to?
Well, to the first part of what you said, you know, I think we stand up and we hold FITARA up as a cost savings bill. You know, we very much will make the argument that if fully implemented, that you will see dramatic cost savings. Now, will you ever reach the full 20 billion, you know, that's potentially out there? Who can say that for sure? But, you know, we're going to hold this up as being a cost savings bill in the end. Now, whether, you know, on the tactics side, I think a lot of these reforms in the past have potentially been rolled into other pieces of legislation. Basically, if there's a vehicle out there for moving it forward, we'll absolutely take advantage of that. I think you'll see it ending up, we'll get it out of the House, I'd like to think, once we introduce it and move it through, and Chairman Issa will certainly make it a priority for moving it through his committee. But then, of course, when it ends up going to our friends on the other side, you know, and there are lots of other things to consider, and sometimes there are vehicles that are moving, and it's just a matter of hopping on that train. So I think that, you know, we're certainly going to look at it as being, you know, in any which way we can option there.
And I would just comment, as Laurent said, I believe both eGov and Cleaner Cohen were attached to other vehicles. So there are...
Wow. We will not speak of Klinger Cohen again. Right?
I think there are, if we're able to kind of hit that sweet spot on an IT management reform bill, I mean, there are different vehicles to get it through. And we're fortunate in that IT reform, that management tends to be as nonpartisan as you see in DC. I'm not saying that there won't be policy differences once again, but it's not budget politics or Supreme Court politics. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
Yeah, and on that, I won't jump in on the logistics of the legislation, since you've heard from the experts on that. However, on your first question about the funding, I mean, I don't think there's any question that we're in a tight budget environment. Whether it's the sequestration, the pending sequestration, or whether it's some other form. I mean, I think we're at a time when the money's kind of there's pressure to spend less money, and not more. And that's exactly, the good news is that's what Chairman Issa is talking about. That's what the folks in the Senate are looking at, and that's what the administration is talking about. And the even better news is that's what industry's been saying. That's what we've been saying for a long time. We've been talking about technologies ranging from cloud to analytics, the ability to save money, to provide better products and services at a lower cost. So I mean, I think at the end of the day, the current budget environment puts more pressure on us all to achieve that. And I think ultimately, whether it's data center consolidation, which is part and parcel with shift to the cloud. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it probably makes the transition maybe a little challenging, and maybe speeds things up more than is perhaps desirable from a lot of the agency perspectives. But will push us to realize some of these cost savings.
I think if I could just add one more thing, I think one of the challenges, though, that we see in the federal IT space, especially with the push for savings, is how do we incentivize our agencies to save the money other than with just a stick? And we have to come up with a better carrot, because I was reading through a GAO report on strategic sourcing, and one of the first things that came up when agency managers were asked about some of the challenges and why they're not doing more strategic sourcing was a fear that if they save money, the end result will be that they then get that much less money next year. And it's a challenge. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only challenge with strategic sourcing, but there has to be we need to figure out a way to incentivize agencies other than just with the looming threat of your budget's going to be chopped by sequestration or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and Chairman Issa has mentioned at different times that if you could save, $20 billion of the $80 billion, if you could then reinvest that, how do you take that from a goal to actual process and rules to bring those incentives to bear?
Sure, and what Jonathan alluded to is a fair point. I mean, absolutely, when you're within an agency, you're worried most of all about your own budget and whether or not you're going to have that same level next year, or if you are going to get cut in one way or another. Now, one of the funny things is when we're talking about the $20 billion in savings, it's money that, at least under the current standard, could be repurposed or reprogrammed in certain instances elsewhere. It's not necessarily going to go back to the Treasury and result in an across the board, just a net gain there. So just by making those savings or making that effort there, you do give wiggle room for other areas, and in this instance, it may be other priorities that the president would have, even if that were the case. But I think one of the other things in regards to buy-in that we really need to that we've also realized as we've gone through this process is that certainly we want buy-in from the agencies, but then there's also folks like yourselves out there, the contractors and those who are providing the services as well, that we're really seeking to get buy-in from also, because we realize that in certain instances it could involve sort of shifting your business model to an extent. Now, whether it's more so towards, we emphasize within the bill using open source where available, so that just for, at least as a base standard across agencies, if, because generally you can at least start off with a broader return on it. And then, of course, if the software needs to be specialized or whatever items need to be specialized based upon individual needs, you go from there. And that's something that sort of, in some ways, can go against the traditional model in which services have been provided to the federal government. But again, you know, and that is still evolving as we're still sort of, you know, taking input and comments from the public on that. But we really, that's one of the ways that we looked at that you can actually get those cost savings that we feel are so important.
I'd like to sort of throw it open to the audience at this point, if we could. I think there's microphones to pass around, but if you have questions, I will stand up so I'm not ignoring the people on this side of the podium. Or we will keep talking. Yes, ma'am.
What you just mentioned a moment ago about possibly, thank you. What you mentioned a moment ago about finding possible cost savings related to IT as you make the changes and as you put out the new reform bill, have you considered allowing the CIOs who will now have potentially additional budgetary authority to make that decision on the reallocation related to IT savings?
Yes, we have, yeah, for the short answer there. I think we see that as being a critical component and goal, is to give the CIOs the flexibility when it comes to when they initially are going through the process of making of finding savings, but also of implementing the new systems, in essence, to at least not to have the ability to transfer and shift where necessary to achieve the broader goal of creating the greater efficiencies within their individual agencies. So it's not just going to be you saved money by switching to this system, now you lose that money. No, it's going to be okay, what can you as the CIO, what else are you going to do in order to create greater degrees of improvement within your own individual agency? And then are those improvements so good that they then need to be applied and adopted by other agencies that are out there?
So other questions? One thing that I'd like to turn to is, you know, there's new policies and policy changes, but then there's the implementation of existing policies. And John, you talked about this a little bit. Are there initiatives underway that you see picking up speed this year, or conversely, are there ones that you feel like really need a kick in the pants from congressional oversight?
I would say yes to both. I think that there's initiatives underway that we're very interested in making sure that they proceed and they continue to pick up steam. The move to the cloud, I think that as we continue to move, and we're here to talk about cloud, but as agencies continue to move to the cloud, what is going to be that next step? Once they kind of hit some of the lower hanging fruit, and I know that even moving email can be and some of those systems is not easy, but once you kind of get past some of those things that initially pop into your head, what then are those next steps, I mean, that you can use cloud for? And in addition, I know one of the initiatives that just started last year that we're very interested in is portfolio stat. Mm-hmm. And we see that as another way to try to just strengthen the power of the CIO and also get the COOs and the deputy secretaries in agencies thinking of IT in a different way. Not just as kind of that discretionary income, discretionary spend where it's your BlackBerries and your computers, but also in a more strategic way, enforcing that those CXOs, whatever they might be, to sit in the same room with the CIO, who is frequently designated as the person at the agency to lead the portfolio stat, and forcing them to look enterprise-wide. I mean, that's the portfolio stat. I believe the second portfolio stat 2.0 will be coming out soon, and that's something we're very interested in, just continuing to monitor as it gets more baked into the budget process, because it's just another opportunity to make sure that IT is being looked at across the agency as a strategic asset, and just how does it play? It plays into every single thing that agencies do, so it needs to be viewed in that fashion.
And are you seeing buy-in on portfolio stats? I hear two camps on it of There are those who think it is wonderful for all the reasons that you just outlined, and there are those who think it is yet another set of forms and boxes to check and hoops to jump through. I'm just curious if the spirit of it's being embraced as well as the mechanics.
I think it depends on the agency, and as far as if I'm seeing buy-in, I've had the opportunity to sit down with DHS CIO Richard Spires, and it seems like he is trying to use it to the extent that he can. If there's agencies that you've heard are not buying in as much,
we won't mention them on stage,
we'd be happy
but yes.
to kind of have them come up and talk to us about it. And to that extent, I'll offer the plea that I offer at many of these things, that if you ever want to talk to somebody on the Hill, we're not as scary as people think we are. So please just reach out. I'd be more than interested in meeting with anybody that has horror stories or positive stories. It's not just all bad news. It's good news too. We like good news as well on the Hill. But I don't know is the answer to your question. I mean, it's something we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, I would just jump in and to your question about policies moving forward, and again, just point out that the administration obviously has been very active, and there's no shortage of policies. Congress is now taking a very close look at this, and a lot of this discussion has been about what Congress is going to do, and we welcome and invite their involvement. But the administration obviously with the cloud first policy and the shared services and mobile, there's no dearth of policies, and as I said, the administration's essentially flying the plane while they're building it, and that's a good thing. So a lot of this is going to continue to move forward. It's a challenging environment to implement with a lot of new technology, and I think so. The key question is, and that's what these guys are focused on, which is, well, what does Congress need to provide that can't be done through administrative policy? Does Congress need to authorize CIOs in the way that Chairman Issa has proposed, and does it need to? I think that's the good healthy debate and discussion that we've been having for several months now, and need to continue having. And certainly, we need to continue getting input from agencies, and I'm sure you all are probably providing your input as best you can to really determine what do we need, what do we fundamentally need to change, from Klinger-Cohen to essentially enable this new style of purchasing, the shift away from, the commodity IT shift. So, I think that's what we're focused on, and it's definitely a balance between what happens, what's already going on, what will continue to go on within the administration, within all of your agencies, and what we need Congress to do.
Laurent, anything on the sort of initiatives moving forward that you think?
Just to sort of echo what David and Jonathan have said, I think that when we're talking about cloud first policy and what the administration sort of done so far, at least I won't say across the board, but just in general, it's sort of like, they've put their big toe into the swimming pool but haven't completely dived in yet. And I say that to mean, there's been movement certainly within certain agencies of, taking the data and starting to move it over to data centers. Now, whether those are still data centers that agency is in control of versus actually, say, working with like a Amazon or someone else in the private sector side, basically to handle most of their data, and then just ensuring that there are the proper security standards there to ensure that that data is safe. I think that it's good that they're starting, but they need to move further in that direction, and I think that's what really one of the things that Chairman Issa is going to encourage them to do, and then to move from just storing their own data there to actually starting to use more cloud-centric services as well. Now, just even those that are that are commercially available at this point, I think that's something that we're going to be interested in, at least wanting them to look into even further. So I'd say that those are just two things there.
And you mentioned cloud. So what about FedRAMP? Which is that a case that it just needs to take its time to come online, or is it a process that may need a little bit of adjustment or encouragement through oversight?
At this point, I'll say that I think it's just one that sort of is still in, it's not to be too corny here, but it's still ramping up, basically. So,
yeah.
we'll basically say that we're going to, we're observing it, we're watching it. Folks in our committee are certainly, engaged and interested there, but we're not going to. But the jury's still out there.
Okay. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there one there?
Hello. What about all these policies are wonderful and they're moving in the right direction, but one thing behind the policy is always the people. And so we have a lot of federal agencies out there, and I've seen a lot of positive changes in the leadership from the CIOs and CTOs and the experience and background of the actual people running these agencies. But obviously, there's a lot of people within the federal government this is kind of new stuff to. So how are policies being directed to make sure that those people that are going to be in charge have the experience, the background to make the correct decisions about their IT goals, their strategies, and the money being spent at those agencies?
Is that question about the sort of recruiting and promoting of those individuals, or giving them the clear guidance?
I guess kind of both. Where's the policy that you're making these policies to ensure that we're going to do the right things, but again, it comes down to the people that are actually going to lead those agencies in the right direction. And again, I've seen a lot of positive changes in a lot of organizations with the backgrounds and experience of the people that are being put in these positions, but there's a lot of agencies that this is all, the cloud is new, mobile technologies are new, and you have to do these things based on these policies, and they might not have the experience or the background to get there. Is there anything from a policy perspective of making sure that there's the right leadership in those positions, the experiences, the technical qualifications?
We have 75 seconds.
Okay.
I was just going to jump in and say, yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. It's consistent with a recommendation that SIIA made, back when we put out a report middle of last year, focusing on priorities for reform federal IT. And what we found in doing that was the federal government is a lot like industry. They're not unique in having a whole lot of professionals who are used to doing business a different way. So they're used to running their own data centers, and they're used to buying technology rather than using technology. And so this cultural shift is a real one. I continue to think that to some extent, it's the largest impediment to the shift to the cloud and some new innovative technologies. And it's one that takes time. I think you raise a good question, and we certainly think that additional resources can be put towards educating and training and kind of transitioning a lot of the current workforce and to help build a better workforce more suited to procuring technologies for tomorrow. So I mean, it's kind of an ongoing effort that both the administration policies will focus on, have focused on, and I think some of the proposals have taken a look at that as well.
I'll try to make this real quick. It's hard to legislate that type of change management. What we're looking at from the committee is just that the agencies, the groups that have gone through the process, making sure that they're sharing their lessons learned, because we shouldn't have to be reinventing the wheel every single time another agency goes through this. So I'll just kind of say that.
And echoing off of that point and going back to Chairman Issa's IT Acquisition Reform Act, we're trying within the bill and within the language that's already been out there to basically say that on the acquisition side, at least, it's taking those individuals who are already experts in acquisition reform and sort of pooling their knowledge and based under one entity to really do that buying. And so streamlining that process amongst those who are already experts and doing it for the federal government. So that's one of the goals that we're definitely looking at with that bill.
Great. And Laurent, you get the last word. So if you could join me in thanking our panelists and